Alrighty, this is Bill Trevaille's reed making corner. Just having a quick little glance at a couple of little things here. So we go across and we've got like some blades. Just the winding tool at the back there. So a quick little glance at that. It comes in the light. It's great, yeah. A little bottle of shellac stuff. Thing of hemp, the thread, little tube of cane, thing with the reeds in it, right there. Very cool. Okay, and then we'll come back out to the rest of the corner. Okay, so down here, the thing for gouging the cane, Bill, yeah? Right there, all set up. In its glory. That's it. Back out of it. At the top, selection of different tools. That one there for doing the shaping the blades, and a couple of screwdrivers done for doing the things, and a couple of chisels. And come back out. I'll have a look at the actual magic table, which is starting off with over here the bench grinder. We have what's that do again? That's the top bit.
Yeah.
Top bit of the blade.
That one is the profiling wheel.
Mm-hmm.
That's the gouging wheel.
Mm-hmm.
That's your tailing jig.
Mm-hmm.
This is your guillotine for making staples.
Mm-hmm.
And that's also gouging, but you haven't got that one.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I need that.
And up here is the planing tool.
At the back.
Yeah, to make flat planks.
Mm-hmm. I'll just take a side image of this here, just so I can see how it's all put on. Mm-hmm. So it's all sitting. Okay. No problem. Okay. Now I'll look at the other one. Other side of it, down there. Okay.
This is the blade holder that slides under the here like that. The gouging.
Superb. So yeah. Okay. And use talcum powder to make it slide.
Yep. Under no circumstances grease.
Right. Okay.
And of course the must is this
Yeah.
dust extractor. If you don't end up
Dust
pushing up daisies in a few years.
Mm-hmm. So it comes into both sides of the machine. So both wheels. Okay, that looks good for the setup. So we'll stop it there.
Yeah.
Come on. Okay, so I'm back in here, looking down at this bit from the back. Okay, that's it in there, goes in and out.
The reed blade fits on here.
Mm-hmm.
And then you slide it under the wheel for your profile cut.
Just check, I'll get a little glance at this wheel on the side here. Yeah.
Sits on here and slides underneath
Mm-hmm.
profile cut, and you retract it again.
And then I've got this little stop here, which I'll just have a quick look at. Mm-hmm.
Goes up.
That's the one. Didn't do too bad, this. Zooming in. Okay.
Zoom in onto it.
Yeah, another thing I forgot to mention so far is this dial. I'm trying to get
Take it back a bit and you get the whole image. I mean the zooming back a bit. You get the whole image. It's a magnetic holder, which the indicator gets bolted onto, and you'll have to make a little bit of a bridge below that so you can actually measure the thickness of the blades.
Okay, so this thing right here gives us the length that the reed is, so that we get the staple in with the reed and get it exactly to the right length that we're going to use. Alright? Okay, that's good. Right, Bill, you're on.
I'm on. Good. I'll now attempt to show you how to make a reed. And I use the word quite loosely, attempt. I get pretty nervous when someone's watching, especially the camera. But anyway, this is the way I make a reed, and I don't really sort of say that's the only way to make them. You can make them in many different ways, but this is how I make them, and it's up to the individual to make their own choices whether they like it or not. So I'll start going through the procedures a little bit, and later on you can see it for yourself. Well, I'll pick up this tool, it's called a splitter, and with a tube cane, which is round, hollow in the middle. I generally center it on the tube and then give it a bit of a bang. So you end up with 4 segments of bits of cane. And at this point, you can probably assess the cane itself, whether it's good quality or rubbish or whatever. And if you consider it's too old looking, which means it'll be probably dull and grey, I wouldn't bother with it at all. I'd just chuck it out in a bin or something.
Okay.
Because really, you'd just be wasting your time trying to go through it. So by looking at the cane itself, and you'll learn as you go through it what's good and what's bad anyway. You get that sort of experience.
So mainly yellowish.
Yellowish is always the best way to go. That means the cane is not too old. It's got a bit of body in the material itself. So that's something you look at. It's the first observation is the quality of the cane after you've split it. Okay. Now we move on to the next one and show you what to do after that.
We're rolling.
Okay. Now this is the scroll saw I use for cutting segments, little bits of cane out of these strips. Now Adrian still has to buy this. I use this because I've got it, but I think if you can find something perhaps more practical or more, how can you put it, a little bit different way, it's okay too, as long the end result is always the same. So that doesn't really make matter too much. So I get a bit of cane here. Well, I must say this cane is a bit on the thin side, but I'll use it anyway for the demonstration purpose.
Okay. And you put it in the what's that block?
I've got a bit of wood here. I generally square it up onto the blade, and that gives me the length that I'm looking for across from the blade to the guide here. This little block of wood I use to hold the strip, which I put down here. I put the blade down on the table and up against the sides. Now that gives me this sort of stability.
Okay.
Also my fingers out of the way of the blade. I can go. And all you do is slide forward.
Right.
So I'll turn this machine on. I'll cut a couple of blades. Now you notice there's a bit of a slot in there, and the only reason that's in there so I can go past depth of the blade and let the segment go. That's why. So you'd have to probably make a little block, align the slot, and just cut it with a hacksaw to align with the blade itself. After you've set the distance from here to there. Okay.
Yep.
Now I've got the 2 bits here. Now we'll go to the next stage.
Okay.
Now this little thing I made here, it's got one purpose only, to trim the edges like this, and only for the purpose it can be clammed into the next jigs which we'll go to. So it gives you nice straight parallel segments, and that way we'll be able to manage to get it to the next jig. So we'll go over to...
Yeah, I'm on.
Okay. Now from the trimmer we go to this little fella, and it's really a planer really. It's something I made up, one of my very first jigs. Done me well, and I didn't see any point to improve on it, but yours, Adrian, it's more superior than what I've got, because you've got adjustability from the base upwards and down, and you've got also a stop here that can be adjusted, so you can actually get the right blades exactly right. But in my case, we'll put it right here. So I've got two other segments here which I'll prepare for the reed. So I'll put this little segment in here. So puts quite firm, and I start planing down into a bit of a plank. As long as it's flat, that's what we're looking for. Now you'll get a lot of exercise here, particularly in your arms. And after doing about a couple of dozen reeds, or even more than that, your arms feel like, you know, they're dropping off.
Tell me about it.
But if they drop after the first dozen already, that means you're out of shape. So you've got to knock yourself into shape.
Tell me something though.
Eh?
Try to tell me something.
Oh, sort of, a little bit. Now I've got two flat blade planks here, which are now ready to go to the next stage, which I'll show you.
Yep.
I've got a pair of pliers here with bits welded on the end of it called shapers, right? And it's already set for the distance that I want, but it's adjustable for a broader blade or a narrower blade by simply moving this little stop up and down. So I guess when you start making your own reeds, you really have to sort of see what suits you best. I've already preset it to the size that I use, but if you think you want to change it, it's up to you. So what I'll do now, I'll look for the straight edge, because sometimes the end of the cane is not very straight, so look for the straight bit and place it in first.
That's what I sometimes forget, I sometimes put it in the wrong way.
You keep remember that, but it's just a procedure you get used to, and you'll always do it after that once you get used to it. So basically I've put it central to that. Now this is the bit I do, I just squeeze the pliers, but it has effect on playing if you play the pipes on a regular basis, because this handle gets stronger than that one, and it may bug you up a bit. So I suggest, you know, like to put it between a vice or something, and so you don't have to apply pressure. But I'll just show you what I do here. So this is what I do, and I have a chisel, an ordinary chisel, very sharp, preferably. So the sharper it is, the better it is, because you don't have to apply a lot of pressure for cutting. If it's blunt, you'll be pushing and you'll not get the blades nice and even. So what I'll do is I just put it on the end of that, show you, I'll place it here. Always put your chisel not straight on, angle it and push across on an angle. That way it cuts freer and easier, like that. Okay? And the others, turn it around and repeat the same process.
Easy. Make it easy.
Simple as that.
Make it look too easy, Bill.
Well, it is simple. If you've got the right grip in your fingers.
So just a little squeeze and then go.
Side on, and there you go. Right.
Easy going.
Having said that, I think I didn't do a very good job of this one. So what will I do? Chuck it away. And it can happen. Failures can occur. So I'll get another segment here. And I'll go back to this step again. But always have a good look at what you've done to see whether it's properly made. Because if it's not, and you let it go through, you can bet your boots on it, your reed will turn out crap. So avoid that at any time.
Get rid of
Do
all.
everything right. Every step
Get
right.
rid of all the bad factors, and then you should get a good read.
Don't compromise. Just if it's not right, put in the bin.
Right.
Because your failure rate will be too great, and it's no good. And if your failure rate is a lot, you get frustrated, and then you won't make reads anymore. So it's best never to say, oh, I might fix it, may not.
Okay.
Well, I've got two blades here. Now we go ready for the gouging. Okay. Now we go over to the gouging wheel, which is this one here. And the purpose of that is to build a radius on the inside of the reed. So you got two sides with the radius already preset, and that means you'll get a good opening for the blade itself. It's easy. I think I just broke it. I just squashed it together and it went. So it's very fragile, so I'll have to make another blade and come back to this one.
Okay.
See,
I'll start it just now.
Yeah, just with the other blade. I've got two segments again, and I think I've already explained the reason for this wheel. Now this wheel, I've got my measurements a little bit imperial and metric, so I'll call this one imperial, and I'll talk about that one in metric, and that one imperial.
Okay.
This is a 115mm wheel radius. Now that's the highest position of the wheel, because there's a slight angle on here like that, which is on your drawing you've got anyway. Okay, so and the reason for the angle is because when I put this bit of reed on here, it's got some sort of lead in to cutting rather than hit straight on. Alright, so this is what I do. Place the reed on, have a look that's nice and flat onto the base. Switch the machine on, of course, otherwise it wouldn't work, and just push forward. Now at this point, the blade is thickened to the exact size you want. So from this point, I'll just cut the other blade and I'll move on to the next one.
The hand position with the left hand at the bottom.
Left hand on the bottom, on the base, and that's the reason push it against the side, so it can't push it out that way. And the other hand,
So guide.
one action if you can, smooth action. Smoother the better. If you go in a jerking fashion, you'll get cuts along inside surface. Straight forward like that. Right.
Super.
Slip sideways and pull it away. Now, for quality control and your own work, we now go over to the gauge, and I'll show you the reason why I do that. I'll switch it off a sec. So I'll take this blade over here. I'll stick it under the, always zero it first to be sure it's zero.
Yeah.
Lift the bottom up and place it about the middle of the blade.
Okay, I'll get that from here.
Right? Middle of the blade like that. Because that's usually your thickest part that doesn't get cut in the profile cutting.
Okay.
So it's always the thickest part in the middle of the blade.
So that should
And
be
that should be between 50 thousandths of an inch and 54 thousandths of an inch. Anywhere in the middle will be fine. Right, now I can't give you the metric offhand, I don't know exactly, but it's the thousandth of an inch we're talking about. At the moment it's sitting at 51 thousandths of an inch. Okay,
good.
so we'll take it out of there, so we know this bait's okay. We've tested one. You don't need to do all of them because they'll all be the same. So if you take a break, like going for tea, and you come back tomorrow and do it again, the first one you cut, always check, make sure it's the same spot.
Get it back in there.
Yeah. So
Keep
sometimes,
control over your process.
well, sometimes the they can be so cold that you have shrinkages in the materials you work with. But as long as within 51 and 54 thousandths of an inch thickness, you're quite in order there.
So what's the other blade like?
I'll put the other one in. It's actually 52 thousandths of an inch, slightly thicker.
But that's bugger all.
It's nothing.
Excuse
You're
me.
in the range of 51 and 54 thousandths of an inch. As long as you're within, you're both right.
Okay.
All right. Now the next step we'll do, we'll just prepare the blades. Because when you actually make a plank, you can't get rid of all this hard stuff on the outside. And because it's very hard and it's got a lot of resin in it, if you put it through the wheel, because it's using sandpaper, it'll clog your wheel up if you keep going it for a long period. So to avoid some of that and to keep your wheel in good condition, I just a little sort of a hobby knife and trim just the corners off that. So the wheel, you can always leave a little bit, but as long as you get the majority of it. Right, and now you've basically prepared it for the actual profiling shape.
Okay.
So I'll take it over to this machine and come this end. Now this machine is already preset. Now we'll talk about the wheel for a sec. The diameter of this wheel is not really that important in terms of this wheel. That's very critical to have the right diameter. This one's not. What is important though, on the inside there's a radius which will cut over the blade, and that radius is critical to keep the blade uniformly and correct. Now I did mention I use metric and imperial. So this is an imperial dimension, I think it's 115 I said. This one is the radius of 6 inch, which is 150 mil.
Right.
Okay, and
75 radius.
Sorry, 75 radius, diameter of 6 inch. I should
That's
mention.
right.
Okay, so but your wheel's already set up for that, and I've marked up the my drawings, but you'd have to modify yours. So
Right.
if you ever forget, you can always go back to it, and you know what you've done.
And that's 240 grit, isn't it?
And the sandpaper on both sides is 240 grit to be used. Yes.
And what?
Don't use any paper material. Use cloth, emery cloth.
Right.
And I'll give you a bit to take back with you.
Right.
To remind you what it really should look like and feel like.
And if you had to replace it, what was the glue stuff that you used?
The glue you use to stick them on is just any sort of contact adhesive, and I think I can give you the Australian version of it, which is well, our product here Sally's. I'm not sure if you get it in American, but it's called Quick Grip. So you apply a thin layer on the cloth, back part of the cloth, and a thin layer on the wheel, and you let them dry enough so it's touch dry before you actually lay it on. This wheel is fairly straightforward because it's sort of angled,
Flattish, yeah.
and you can put it on the conventional way. Let it dry. Always leave a bit of a gap because you can't get a perfect seal anyway.
Right. So
and it really doesn't matter.
Excess cloth over each side because you'll cut it off later.
You've got to cut it off here.
Yeah.
So you give, but this one here, because it's sort of on an angle, when you have, I'll show you if I get with the cloth here. When you put it on, because it's on an angle, you'll never get a perfect straight round. And what will happen? This will twist a little bit because of the angle, right?
Yeah.
So it's always best to start one end, and it sort of comes across on an angle. By the time you get down here, it'll probably be up at an angle that way.
Twisted.
Right. So you give yourself enough material to move across in from this direction.
So it has to be fairly wide.
Yes, it's going to be fairly wide for this one. But you'll find out after the first strip whether there's too much or not.
Yeah.
But make sure it's all flat. It's going to be dead flat.
Right.
Because any high spots in them
Any bubbles are going to cut
will
more.
affect this when you finish work. So make sure it's flat.
Okay.
This one, as I explained to you earlier or yesterday, when you put it on, you stick it on, and then you get a cord and you wind it all the way out. Start one side first from the middle towards the edge, and when you actually got right to the edge, cross over and start putting it over the other side, right to the edge. Tie a knot in it so it can't undo itself, and that way, and let it dry. I'd say a good half an hour or whatever before you decide. Leave it if you got time. Just leave it there.
Yeah.
But if you want to make reeds, half an hour will be sufficient to let it dry. And then you trim off the edges again, and then you basically put it right then.
Okay.
Okay.
Yep.
So now we'll go and cut these blades.
Obviously, the bench grinder's got to be so that nothing moves.
Yeah. What happens when you actually mount a bench grinder eventually? They'll have rubber feet. Get rid of those. Stick it straight on the metal so you have a solid position so no movements can come into it.
So you've just put a little rubber mat there.
I put a rubber mat, but it's not necessary.
Right.
I did things thinking it may be an assistance, but really it doesn't matter.
Okay.
It really doesn't matter. Because the unit's earthed anyway.
Right.
Okay, so it's got an earth on it already.
Right.
So it's not really a big problem. Because now one factor is if you leave this motor running for a long time, and it depends what motor you get, whether it's the quality of the motor will run hot or not. Make sure that when you actually make all these blades, that you don't overheat this motor, because they're only a bench grinder, and they're not meant for long time running. They're meant to sharpen the tool, and they're meant to be shut down.
So hand hot.
So if you can hold it by hand for say maybe 1-2 seconds, 3 seconds, even say 4 seconds. Or if you can hold that all without hurting your hand, it's around about 40 degrees, right? If you put your hand on it and you immediately take it off, it's about 60, and you're really on the borderline of
Burning
the insulation on the windings. So
that's 3,000 RPMs, that motor.
But what you can do to safeguard yourself, you can get from the engineering shops the thermometers that have a magnetic base. And I think I might have one, and I'll show you that. So,
We're on?
this is a little thermometer you buy in engineering shops in various places. And all that is just one of these dial things. It's got a couple of magnets on. And if you really want
I missed that, sorry.
really
Yeah. Alright.
stick it on your motor, on top, anywhere is metal, and you just leave it there. So if you hit the high temperatures, you'll know by just looking at them whether it's going to be too hot or not.
Okay.
And they'll take a measurement of the motor. So if you want to get very elaborate in setting up, that's what you can do. But I'll explain, the hand feel is also a good indicator, but you need to sort of get used to that.
Right, yeah.
Okay?
Do everything in small quantities. That way you're safer with the control of everything too.
Yep, never go, you know, like if you want to make some reeds and you say, alright, I'm going to make some reeds today, I want to make about 3 dozen reeds. You prepare everything in step as we talked about, but when you get to this machine here, don't have the machine running for an hour, a couple of hours and do all the action, because apart from this running hot, there's also a problem if something has shifted and changed in cutting, then you may have cut so many blades and they're useless.
Wasted 200.
Yeah, so there's no point going through huge quantities in one hit and not checking yourself as you go through. You've got to check yourself all the time. You can't compromise on that, because you know, I mean, you may not have it sitting down properly or whatever, but just make yourself a couple of tubes, make those reeds, because you're making them for yourself. Make them, check them as you go through, and you're happy, make another couple, and so on. You know, and never make too many at once, because things will change.
Right.
All right, let's show you the profile setup. You need to come around this way.
Okay. Gotcha.
Okay. So you place your reed with the curve side down on this particular position. I'll put this one on for a moment. Both the same. Now, what is important, because the positioning of the blade should really come to the edge, and I think I've done the same with yours. If it doesn't, you may have to make a mark somewhere that the ends always end up in the same spot.
Right.
If it doesn't, say for example, you cut a blade that's broader, it means it'll be too far forward.
Okay, so it'll cut wrong.
You cut wrong, that means if you go forward, the profile will be really back down here somewhere, and the reed is really useless, and you really can't use it, basically. So always check your length, position. Now these little strips are super glued on, and it's a possibility they could come off from time to time.
Okay.
So if one comes off, just make yourself a blade, put it back on, get to the right position, hold it, and put some glue on the strip again, and just be sure it's nice and tight in the same spot, then you're right.
Okay.
Right, so I'll just do a bit of a cut now. I'll switch the machine on. The dust will go that way. So I don't have the suction fan running, but I suggest to have one running so we get rid of the dust, otherwise it'll go straight into your face. And you can see it. I'll just go forward. Just one. Two. Now the other thing too is very important. I'll just put these blades here. Your action of cutting has to be the same for everyone. Otherwise, don't go too slow, because you'll take so much off that it could be too thin. If you go in and out, the cane will be too thick. So I would suggest that you really practice of having a nice push forward and come straight back. Now, they're both two of them the same. You can always look at the blade and see if it's thick. You can always go back to the dial indicator, measure the tip. That's the same. If one is thicker than the other, you simply put it back again and take another cut out of it, and then you'll get it right. So your motion in and out has to be uniform to get the same sanding procedure going. That's quite critical.
We're rolling.
Okay, now we've made the blades, and all we've done now is just cut the profiles on them, as you can see, a little bit side on. Okay, there's two of them like that, of course. Now it's a good point now to take it over to the dial indicator and check the tip of the blades. So I'll take them over, place it under just on the inside. And it reads about 9/1000 of an inch, that blade. It's right on the very tip. There's no point going further up because it's got a taper, and you really can't get to the same spot every time to take a consistent reading. So just if you take the tip, it'll be reasonably consistent. You don't have to do this all the time, but you must take spot checks. That's one. It's about the same. It's actually 8.5, so it's a little bit thinner. So I may have pushed it in a bit slower than the previous blade. So basically these blades are fairly good. Now the range is between 8 and 10/1000 of an inch. And when you get to the thickness of 10/1000 of an inch and you put the reeds together and make them, it'll be quite firm, and you'd have to start scraping.
So I make a good band reed though?
It'll make a great band reed actually. For good seasoned players, you know, they can handle a decent reed.
So a solo reed would want to be about 8.5.
Yes, yes. Or alternatively, you could still use one, but 10/1000 of an inch, and you just have to scrape it to suit your own strength. You know, which you actually can do. So these are the two blades, and if you look them up against the light, and this is the test you must always look when you make a reed, see the shape, or actually you see inside it's sort of cut away and it's heavier looking on the outside, and that indicates you got a pretty good strong edging. If it was thin all the way down the side, that would be totally useless, and you wouldn't get a good seal. But it depends how you go. But if you take it further back or up against, you can see a dark and
you
the
can
light
see
shading.
a lightness through, so you can
Yes,
see
you can
some
give it
pattern.
You can see the pattern of how it's been made.
I'm not sure how that vamp will turn up in the video here, but I've got the idea of it.
Whatever you can pick up from. Okay.
Yep.
Now what we go down to this little jig actually to cut the tails on it. You may have to come around that side edge.
Yep. Let's watch that power.
This jig here, it's a jig made to cut the whole reed by hand. If you made one off, and I think you did that last time you were here, you made them all by hand in this way. For single reed and scraping, that's ideal, but for, say, making a few reeds quickly, this is the way to go. So I just place it on the back here, with the tail towards the stop. I'll get the other chisel, and the chisel.
There's Angus.
What do you want, boy? Hey, what do you want? What's going on
Hey
there?
Angus, you're famous, man.
That's my dog Angus. He's been my mate for the last 13 years. Now this is the chisel I use for that. Again, it's very important to be very sharp. So watch it, you don't hack it into the steel, but keep it always sharp for the best results.
And you got the corners taken off.
I've got your chisel already ground in that shape, like that, and the reason I've done it so the sharp bits fit in between the cavity here, so you won't be digging into the steel.
Right.
And that's the reason. But eventually, if you make a lot of these and keep sharpening all the time, you probably have to grind a bit further down, you know. But that's probably in the next 10 years down the track or whatever. Now I've made marks on your stop as well. I cut in the center of it, and I'll place the chisel between the two marks I've got here, about the middle. Now, the base of this thing is adjustable. You can have it high or low, but I'll leave it fairly shallow, and I'll raise the chisel a couple of millimeters, push down with the left hand, and just slide it towards the end. Now you pick it up, it's still fairly thick. Sometimes you get it in one go, sometimes you may have to do it 2 goes. Depends on what sort of angle you use this chisel at. Now bring it up a bit further, and I push down again. It's still fairly heavy, still not. If you can look side on, it's still thick still.
So you want to have it basically paper thin?
You want it nice taper so it bends easily around the staple. So I'll give it another cut. This time I push a bit harder down. As I said, sometimes you get in one go and sometimes in 2 or 3. Now that's what you want. So you've got a bit of a curve, it's pretty thin, and that'll bend nicely around the staple. I'll do the other one. See, that's a one go. About the same. Okay. So now we have 2 blades ready to be tied. Alright, I'll put them aside here. Alright, and while you switch the camera off, then I'll go ready to the next stage.
We're on.
Now I'll just show you how to make a staple. Now, if you can get the solid brass staples, it'd be a great idea. What I generally do, have strips like that. Copper sheets cut up. The thickness of the material I use, and I think most reed makers use, is at 0.4 of a millimeter thickness. And I've got the guillotine you've seen earlier on. Cuts them basically in some sort of a wedge shape. Okay.
Slightly different on a slight angle.
Yes, the width on one side is wider than the bottom end. That's mainly because once you've actually shaped it and bent it and flattened it, the narrow portion will come out a bit and will be almost parallel when you tie it onto the reed, and that's the reason why I have a little bit of a wedge shape. Wedge is my German accent coming through. I'll get the pair of pliers. I've made a pair of pliers like that, and I've put an old one I had in your box. It really has got a bit of a groove in it, and it's got the shape of the internals of the staple itself. A bit of a mandrel. And I use it basically as a guide. I place it on the tool, centralize it.
Which end up? The
narrow end to the top and the wide end to the bottom.
Okay.
Because remember that's your tapered end here, so it'll be the narrow part.
Little squeeze.
Okay. Okay. One of these hammers. Give it a bit of squeeze. Give it a little tap so it beds properly. Put it in this slot and knock it down. Now I should have a narrower slot because it pushes the copper straight up. Now what I've done now, it actually is a little bit apart here, as you can see. At this point I'll just knock the tips in first towards the center. And the reason you do that, so there's no overlap on the end of it. Okay. And after that you just flatten the rest of it. Now you don't need to be a panel beater to do this. You just making a lot of them, it will come very easy. And that's virtually not shaped, it's just got this funny shape here. Okay, that's good enough to begin with.
What's that funny shape? Can I see?
Well, my tool gives you that shape. It doesn't really matter a lot for what I do because the final shaping will put it in place. So I'll get this little mandrel made and have one made before you go back, which fits in here like that. It doesn't have to be snug fit, it's just long as it fits in. I push it into a tool which I've actually filed into the final shape of the staple. I've got 2 of them made. The first stage is I place it on like that and I pull it back.
So the mandrel comes out so it can move.
Yeah, so it allows it to shrink in or to crimp in if you like. I give it a couple of taps. And you end up with a tool, the reed with the staple that's very bad, so I'll chuck it away. We'll make another one. See, I get nervous when someone's watching. Normally nobody's around, you know, generally not a problem. I won't say anything, I'll just make one, and then we go from here. I've made it looks a bit odd, but that's the beginning. The idea of the first one is for me is to sort of narrow the edges right down. Okay, so I still widen the middle, of course, but it's got to come down to sort of a right angle. And actually, the tool don't fit very well. So what I'll then generally do, place it here, push it right up to the front, and then go to the next one. And I leave the mandrel the way it is. 3 more taps.
Turn it over. Loosen it off, yeah.
Three taps is not important. You can give it 4, 5, 6 as long as you want to hit it. And basically, it gives you the shape of the staple.
Okay.
And the front portion, that's important to get a nice even shape. The back part of it, I've still got a gap in it, but I can close that in on the winder. Alright, so now from here I'll take it to the winder.
Okay, from this angle or
I think you might best go.
yeah, I'm on. Yeah.
And here I'll just squeeze the ends together, make sure it's nice and tight and sealed. A little bit of manipulation. I'm not too worried if it closes here a lot, because actually when you wind it, you pull the 2 ends together anyway. But it is important to have a good seal up the front. Now where'd I put the file?
File?
Oh, I've got it up there on the
There's
other bench.
the small one, yeah.
No, the other bench, so shut off a minute. Half an hour, I've managed to find it. All I use the file for is just get the rough edges off in the center. Just pull it around a bit. And get the sandpaper, and you actually end up making it look like a new staple.
240 cloth again, eh?
240 cloth, actually even a bit of fine will be better actually. Get a bit of fine stuff. Now the stable's made, just check the front. Now I've got a mandrel made, it's got a mark on it. Push it on and make sure it ends up at the same spot every time, and that means your opening, the height will be the same.
Okay.
And that gives you some sort of point that the staples always will be the same.
Okay.
Now it's right on that mark now, so I'm quite happy with that. You examine the front, make sure it's nice and flat. Get the edges away. Get some little files, little nail, or I don't know what they call them actually. They're little files. You can buy a whole series of them. They're flat ones, oval ones.
I've got a set.
And all you use one of them for is just get the burrs out on the inside, so you have no burrs out. Just rub it a little bit. Right, staple's pretty good. Here's a staple, the shape that I like. So the opening, it's still rough here, but we'll finish with it off later. Okay, doc, and that's basically make it as a staple. I get the blades, throw them in just ordinary water. If it's very cold, it'll take longer to penetrate. So if the water is just sort of nice and warm, body temperature or thereabout is ideal. So, but just leave it in there. Don't leave it too long. I only leave it for 15-20 seconds. I just check it for test, make sure it's pliable, but in this case it's very hard. So I'll leave it longer.
It's part of that bunch I used.
Yes, it's tough stuff. Now the chances are it'll get soft, but it's also possible it won't soften at all. That means it'll be too brittle, and as you bind it, it'll split, and that means that bunch of cane is really useless.
So I kick it.
So you just get rid of it, because no point trying, you're just not going to make it. So, and I feel this could be the case here. But having said that, we'll not make judgments too early. Still very hard. Yeah, I'm not very confident it'll go well. One of the worst things you can do is leaving it too long and it gets waterlogged. And that means the cane, it will be too soft. And when you actually tie it around the staple, it'll open up like a barrel. And to close it would be very difficult to keep it closed. So the amount of water goes into the cane, minimum quantities, the better it is. So don't leave it like it for an hour and go for lunch or and then come back and tie it, because it's definitely not the way to do it. It's still very tough.
So was the other stuff I had, and it wasn't too bad, but yeah.
I will try and tie it, but I will think it'll split right down the middle. But we'll give it a shot. We won't say anything until it happens. Get the two blades side on and make sure it's nice and flush with the top and pretty well square on. Okay. get your little clip made, and all it does is hold the bits together, and I just place it on here.
So it's more open one end than the other.
Yeah, it's pretty, it's open end to take on the thick portion and lower down the other one because you don't need thickness. But what is important is that you squeeze down on the edges, keep them close together. So the middle part is not that critical to be completely on top. It's just make sure you can have a look, and that's good enough.
Right.
Now what I'll do with this, I'll put it on here on the winder without the staple yet, so it opens the two tail ends together.
Yep.
And that way I'll be able to just pick it up and hold the two open like that, and I'll just place the staple in between. Like that.
Yep.
Push it forward to a certain point, and then we go over to this little jig which got preset distance of 42 millimeters.
Yep.
You place this, is lower than the top bridge, so I'll push it
Until it fits
so
in.
it just fits in nicely, and that way all your blade and staple will be exactly the same length. The distance from the end of the staple and the inside the heel will be 19.3 millimeter. So once you cut your blades the exact position and the staples are exact same length, you should always end up in the same length overall, and that's important for the balance of the reed.
So yeah, so I should check out when I set it up.
Then I'll just place it on the staple like that. Now the next stage is make sure the staple is central. In this case it's too far over to one side, so all I do is push it over a bit by hand over.
Keeping the back end steady.
Keep that steady, so it can't, and just move it forward a little bit, and you just check, and that's where some of your own judgments have to come into whether it's square or not. But if you make enough reeds, yeah, you'll soon tell, and that'll be indicated by the reeds you finish making. It'll be either like that all over the place, but you'll soon find out anyway. Right, now, to me that looks reasonably central. I'll get a pencil. Now what generally you do now, you mark your end of the staple.
Yeah, I'll try and get that.
Okay, because it is very important that you don't tie past that ball, because all what happens there, you collapse the cane inside your soundbox area and it'll distort the lips completely, and it's just not required, so not desired I should say. You should always stick to the exact mark, and if anything a little bit under, because you can always take an upper fraction.
Because you don't want to collapse.
Once you go over, I think you'll never get it back to where you should have it.
Okay.
Okay, so we got to that stage, so I'll take a bit of string, obtainable from upholstery places
And you do it.
for stitching, and you just
Roughly do it.
determine
ground.
the length, cut a bit off. Yeah, you got this action pretty good, so I'll talk about it. The end on your left hand, bit on your right, a bit that long, go underneath, about the middle, and just over. Now yourself does it twice, I just want to do it once only.
Yep.
And pull nice and tight at that stage, so and then cross over with the right hand, and just hold the other end in place. Now if you haven't got that idea together, you have to do it once or twice, but eventually you won't have any problems. So all I'm doing is now going over the same chord maybe 2 or 3 times and gradually increasing the tension. Okay, now I can pull hard now, it won't come away. Now with this thing here, as I showed you before, hold this in your left hand, use your pinky, slide up and down to the right distance and let go. That way you can hold this end and cut off the excess string. And at this point we're ready for finishing the tie. So curl the left hand bit around the twine, not an awful lot, just enough to hold, but get it towards the end so you've got plenty of room to move. And then start turning. Now at this stage don't pull too hard. Gradually as you go forward increase your tension. Okay, so I'll go down, but what is important, the motion is going to be continuous, so I'll just tie it in a continuous fashion without hoping it don't crack the cane. Right up to the line, and then just fling it back and go back over it again. Get to this stage, increase your tension and tie the rest. Okay? Then you take the bit underneath, flip it over. You gotta be able to hold the tension there and just pull it tight. Now that reed is now tied. Take your clip off. Make sure that everything is straight. And look at the gap. Now the gap looks pretty big to me,
Right.
because it's a very tough cane. So you take it, you blow the back of the reed,
Do it again. Yeah.
suck and blow, and that gives a test that the sides are sealed. If the sides are sealed, well, you're happy with the finished, almost finished product. Place your mandrel back inside, and then we start manipulating the opening. So you hold the edge, don't squeeze hard in the middle, just the edge, and start going backwards against each other. I usually hold against my stomach because it gives a better stability. So I'll just start twisting the blade. Turn it over.
Holding the edges.
Same the other side. And what that does, it lays the opening properly on the blades. Okay? At this point you go, it sounds like a reed. If you're not happy with the overall shape, you just push the finger here and push on the middle portion. Check again. Just do that a few times, because the reed's got to take the form of the staple and it's got to settle down. And you can't avoid not doing this, because you've got to make sure that the shape of the vamp and the opening is exactly right. So you end up with an opening such as that,
See if we can get it out here.
which is generally pretty good. Okay?
Yeah, I don't know, I'll come up. Yep.
So you can judge by yourself the opening, whether it's good or bad. If you look against the light, you can see the light shades and the dark shades. You can see that the edges has got quite a bit of support, and it sort of comes down to the middle, thinner, and that's what it's called the vamp in the center, and that's what you're trying to aim for.
That's coming up well.
Yeah, okay, and that's what you should be having. The opening is about right. At the next stage, you listen to the first one. You listen to the crow. The first one you blow is sort of crackly. The harder you blow, it comes into an even crow. Now when that reed dries, it'll get harder and firmer, but in principle you want the two crows to happen even when the reed's finished. So I think I'll show you that later on. Now this reed is basically finished. Now you can decide at this point whether to measure the blades from the end of the cord to the tip.
Yep.
In this case, it's a smidgen, or whisker if you like. We say smidgen or whatever. I'll push the cord back a bit, because when you actually start running off the wind, that means one edge has got a little bit higher than that side, and that's why I push it back down to an even position, nicely round. It's got 19 point something, 19 point whatever, just over 19 millimeter, which is a little bit on the long side, and also the edge is not very smooth and whatever.
Right.
So what we'll do at this point, we can go and trim it a little bit. Now that's where you'll have to go and see about these clippers.
Yes, a trimmer.
To do it more professionally, I use a chisel. I get 80% success rate. Sometimes I get a bit shaky and end up terrible. But if you're a little clipper, you get them right every time. Okay, and you can adjust your length as well. So we'll switch off, and we'll go over to the other end where I can actually cut off. Right.
There we go.
Now I use the same chisel as for the tailing end, which is generally the sharpest chisel, and I can place it on here, flat on something flat. Preferably something not too soft, because your chisel will go right into it and you won't get a good clean cut. So you need something like a laminate surface or whatever to chip. Of course, it's always hit and miss, because you really don't know. You take a punt at the distance. That's why it's hit and miss about how much you take off. Sometimes you end up taking a little bit, and you think, cripes, and then you get cursed and swearing, and then you make another one. But anyway, if you get this little trimmer, it'll fix all those problems. I place my forefinger here, because that becomes a guide to run down on top of the blade. I just gauge approximately what I want to trim back. Small amount. Hold down and hold the chisel up and push. Spray down. Now I've cut it. It's quite clean, but it's on an angle. Drats, again, terrible. It just looks a bit odd, but it still works. It doesn't really affect a big thing, it still works.
So we'll go. Secret to McAllister, cutting them squint.
Squint, exactly. It takes skill to do that, you know. So we'll go over there and see. Right, ready? Now because I've cut a bit off, the reed will be hard. Harder, I should say. So if I blow it now, I get a croak. If I blow harder, I still get a croak. Now, that reed probably will be for a strong player. Now at this stage I won't do anything, I'll just blow it in the chanter. But before I do, I make sure there's no burrs on the outside of the reed, the staple. Make it nice and smooth, because once you sink it down the reed seat, there's a chance you may dig it in the side of the reed seat, and you'll damage the reed seat, and you don't want to do that. So I'll just put in, before I go to, I'll trim off the excess cane that's sticking out the back end of it. Okay? I leave a little bit longer usually, so I can actually tie it for testing reasons. I suppose after making a reed in 10 years, I'll probably wasted heaps amount of cord, but
yeah, well,
that's the way it goes. Stick your reed in at this point.
Wait now, reed, eh?
Truth. So it's quite strong to blow. If you get a good strong blower, you'll have no problems going through it. But seeing I don't play that much these days, I don't think I'm a good blower. But we'll make it a bit easier. And what you generally do to these hard reeds anyway, is by trimming the sides, and also it'll look much better as a finished reed. So again, I always stick my mandrel in, so I've got something to hang on to. It's always a good idea. Then I always move the side so that actually the shadow falls on an angle. You can see the better. And all you do is trim. Put your finger here so you can't go too far. So I trim a bit back. While I'm just trimming the edges. I do it with the already tied like that. And if you go a bit too hard back, you'll cut the cord and the whole thing comes apart. So you got to do it very carefully. You see little burrs hanging out here, but when the reed's finished and dry, and before you put lacquer on it, you can actually unwind it a bit, clean it off, and then just wind it back on again. All right. So basically, I've taken a bit of the hard stuff, excess cane that you don't really need off. And to smooth it out overall, I've got a sanding board which you can buy in an old music shop, but there's actually French, comes from the music shop they sell. You can buy them like that. I've had it for 20 years and I'm still using it. So with a little rubber for cleaning the wheel, it will keep it quite in order, and you'll never ever wear it out. I place it on an angle, push it down so I know it's flat. And basically what I do then is just sand it backwards and forwards. Now I'm jumping the gun here a little bit. Normally I wouldn't do this until the reed's completely dry.
Right.
But for the purpose of the tape and showing, I've done it that way. So now you've smoothed it off, now test the reed again. It's close, it's beautifully closed. Blow it, just wet it a bit. It's still croaking, so it's still a bit firm. You get the chisel, or the knife if you like, scrape the edges. And a little bit off the middle. Because if you've got grubby hands, the reed will be dirty, so you've got to try to get rid of the dirt as well. So there's a double action there, but mainly you're weakening the edges a bit so the reed will vibrate more freely.
So you're going out from the sound box?
Always from the sound box to the side. Never too much here at this point in time. And you do both sides approximately the same way. In the middle up. And then just gently clean it a little bit. Not a lot. Because by taking too much off, you'll change the balance of the reed too much. So every little step taken gradually is better than big steps, because once you make a big step, you ruin your reed completely. Now at this point, I'll give the reed another try. I'll blow it again. I'll just wet the reed a bit. It's nearly
starting to lose the
starting
grip.
to lose. So actually, it's a bit still firm still. So let's keep scraping a bit more. Sandbox area in particular, and take a couple of swipes across the whole, all of the blade, but usually from the middle to the edges. Not an awful lot. You hear the difference? You hear a crow with a crackle. If I underblow, if I increase blowing by wetting it a bit, it becomes an even, and that's what you want for a reasonably balanced medium reed that's not too hard. If you get an even tone all the time, it'll be that the higher will be very scratchy, it'll be easy, and I don't think the reed will last the distance. So you sort of got to go both ways. I'll put it back in the chanter and we'll try the sound of it.
Still got a lot of kick off it.
It's got a lot of kick. It's got a fairly nice crow, I think. Oh, blimey. Now, it may be a bit firm still. You have another good look at the opening, and it's possible it may have opened up a bit more. So if you want them a little bit easier, again, put your mandrel back. And it's what I call walking the reed. You actually walk in the blades a bit. You're wobbling it from the edges only, not the middle. That's where you keep the pressure on the edges and walk it a bit. And again, it closes the blade affection. And you can overdo it, of course, and the reed is ruined. So it's small steps again. It's important. I've actually probably put it too far. Now the reed itself is a lot easier. It's a little bit higher in pitch, and it hasn't altered the sound overall too much, because you really haven't removed any cane or anything. So it's still in a pretty good shape.
Cubic IG.
So basically that's your reed. Now the reed is still wet, of course, and it will dry to a point where it can be too dry. So you really have to put the moisture back to make it vibrant. And if you really feel like you need to scrape a bit more, scrape a bit more. But generally around the sandbox area, edges and a little bit of the middle, but not much. Mainly the edges. And from here across to about here. Because remember, there's a vamp which runs. It's quite, if you see the shades here, it's quite, that's where you scrape from the edges about approximately that way. Right? And that's all you do. And if you want to really scrape a bit more, get some of the ridges out in the middle here. Just across it a little bit. And I'll blow the reed again. It's got a croak behind. It's still got that shrilly bit. So it means it's still a bit on the shrill side. That part in the middle. Right, I wouldn't do much any more than that. The cane itself is very hard, so you will probably have to do a little bit of scraping to get it balanced in for yourself, or
Once it's dry.
for various players that are easy blow, you know, be too hard for them. And you don't change your jigs, because you might get another cane that's soft, and you don't have to do any of that at all. So you got to sort of, because the machine's set up for certain cuts and dimensions, that's where you get the weak reed, a medium, and a hard reed from. Because the cane variable, and it doesn't matter what you do, you can't change that. And that goes for all makers that make reeds, where you end up, you know, having cane. You can't blow it. The reed, you can't blow the reed. That's the hardest of the cane. It's the unfortunate way. So, but you can manipulate a bit. You check the sides for, be sure that it's really tight, and these are very nicely and tight. There's no gaps in them. I mean, it's sealing well from the bottom to the top, and that's very important for a good reed. With the softer cane, you may get an opening because the strength is so weak here that it won't have enough pressure to keep it sealed. But it still work. Okay. Put it back in the chair once more. Yeah, I'm feeling happy. It's firm, but can't do much about it. At this stage, I would leave it there to dry until it's completely dry, which I think, you know me, in temperatures where you live yourself, where your body temperature is comfortable, and that's the area you should dry your reeds in, you know, and sort of keep an eye on that. Once it's dry, then I'll go through the motions of doing what we have to do, and that usually takes about a day. After a day, never do it too soon, because as you think, you go, oh, that sounds alright, put in your pipes, and you find the next day it's completely gone. So never lacquer it or finish it off too soon. But I'll just show you a little bit of the dags hanging at the side here. What I generally do, you put your clip back. So the blades are firmly put together. Just take the end off once more and just hold it together, otherwise it'll just unwind itself. Place it back on. Just take it a little bit back, about 3 turns past. You don't have to tie it all the way, and just hold it. As you can see, the burrs are there, and just get rid of that. It makes the reed look a bit more, you know, better. Just clean that up.
Professional.
That's all. Put it back on. In this particular instance, it looks clean, all the rest of it. But you may still have to do this with a reed that actually you're under-tied, in other words, not enough tension, that you have to retie it again to get the tension back. So the same procedure, just untie it a little bit, wind back 3 turns from the end, and then apply a little bit more pressure, and then retie to the end and come back, and the reed will generally seal. And it used to happen a lot with the McAllister reeds and early Shepherd reeds used to do that. You could twist the blade either direction, which is not very good. So it's up to you to decide whether you need to do that or not, just by simply testing. If they leak, you've got to retie it again. But it can change the character of the reed if you have it too tight. Which I think in this case I might have done a bit. It's 18.5 now. It's rather short. I prefer 19 as a finished reed. You can always push the cord back a bit at this stage to release some of the tension right on the very edge, to pitch it almost back to 19. And you get it back again. So obviously when I retied it, I must get gotten that a little bit too far, you know? So the single crows back again. And to me that's an indicator that the reed will vibrate quite freely when that happens. So there's a lot of mucking about trying to get a reed to go. And if you make a lot of reeds, I'm sure the makers won't look at so closely. They just make it to a standard way and let it go. Now it's quite free and easy. It's not all that hard now. You can hear it by the initial blow. Listen to the E first. Whether it's got the clarity, the broad sound. If it's very shrill, very high, that reed will be so hard, and high G, high the F, and high will be sharp. So you've got to start doing a bit of scraping to get that sound. But the E3 is always the first indicator when you blow by mouth. You can judge the pitch, whether it's low or high, or whether it's got a full sound. So really, if you stick that in your pipes now, you get quite a vibrant sound from that. And basically that is far like a finish. Now I'll take you to the next step. It's actually putting a bit of lacquer on, and the purpose of the lacquer is only to hold the winding together and sealing some of the openings that may be there. So it's really for that reason only. I use a little bit of lacquer that I've got with a bit of shellac and spirit mixture. You can use the other stuff I told you about, and you really, you can look for that as well. Now you put it back on here again, make sure it's nice and tight, and you actually cut the string off as close as you probably can without unwinding itself. Take it off. Just hold the reed in your left four fingers.
Start at the bottom, yeah.
Yep, start on the bottom over the top of the overlap, or the finished tie if you like, and just seal it off. It dries very quickly. It dries probably in around about 10 minutes. This stuff is dry. And if you really want to have a good seal, you can give it a second coat. Do what you think is necessary to make a good reed. I use cotton buds. If you use a brush, the brush will go hard and you can throw the brush away. Or if you use a little brush, get a little ball of methylated spirits. And if you use this sort of stuff, which is actually a nitrous cellulose lacquer material, you'd have to have a little jar of solvents and you clean your brushes in that. But when you do, say, a lot of reeds, then you really can't keep dipping it. You'll be forever dipping, cleaning, and another one, So I use a cotton bud and just keep dipping and throw the cotton bud away. It's
easy way.
It's the best way. Well, that reed's basically finished. Presuming it's been dried properly and all the rest of it. Now when it dries, it will change perhaps a little bit, and you may have to give it a final little bit of a scrape or a little bit of a sand or whatever, and just leave it there to dry. After a day after the reed's been dried for a day or so and finished off that particular day, they're quite ready to play at that stage. And you could probably go 2 days, because the reed really decayed and really formed and settles to its shape. If it's still moist, it can still move too quickly. If it's settled nicely after the drying period, chances are it'll stay that way. And that's really what you want to do. So really, that's the making of the reed.
Go on.
Right, now we'll talk a bit about the setting up of the gear, of the jigs and what have you. This belongs to Les Young. He's got an extra motor on it, which really you don't really need. You've got your setup already. Now it mainly consists of the bed, which goes to about here somewhere. I guess the base for the profile cutter, and the base for the gouging wheel. Now, firstly, there's a guide here for the block to slide on, as you saw on my own machine. Let's go backwards and forwards. I've already set this guide up as close to center line of this particular board I could, because the motor itself has been located yet in your case, so you may have to adjust them to get to the final result. But where we'll start first is by fixing the motor. Now in the base there's a slot, the elongated slot. Somehow, some of the skinny fingers or skinny hands, or whichever means you can do, you got to stick a bolt underneath that comes up over here. And you see you can move backwards and forwards. 2 bolts have to be brought up. In other words, it would be best to do it if you put the motor down first, align the slots on top, in here, get the bolt through and push it up. Now, it's not going to be easy, but there's probably a way to do it. and I'll sort of demonstrate to you a little bit. I'll get a bolt for you. The bolt to use is a 3/8 imperial bolt. I've got stainless steel, but you don't need to have stainless. You probably need a little bit longer than this. You got to work out the height from the bottom to the top, so the nut will go on. If you get a bit of wire or string or whatever, just get some string. Which I might get a bit. Hang on, I'll just show you what I mean by that.
Good to get to show some of the workshop too.
Yeah.
You get to show some of the workshop while you're doing it.
The rest of the mess and all.
Yeah. It's called a workshop.
No, what did I put it out the string bit? Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Look at all the wood on there. All ready for bagpipes and chanters and stuff.
Yeah. You probably get yourself a bit of wire. I'll use a bit of a welding rod here. But just a bit of wire will do. Oh, hang on, I'll get a bit of wire. Don't waste this thing. Okay. Like that, with a hook on it. Shove it underneath until you get to the slot. Okay. The loop through the string. Preferably if you use something a little bit thicker, so you'll be able to handle it better. My fingers are like sausages, I can hardly feel it. Anyway, tie it on.
Okay.
And pull the string through. Till you here. And take off the string off the hook.
I'll try to do that. Okay.
That means you do the same for the other side, alright? But it's the other side a bit closer, so you may get away with it. And basically, tie it around your bolt.
Oh yeah.
The reason I made it so narrow, and mine is a little bigger than that, is just it was obviously a standard air mile, and I tried to minimise on the weight, so I had to get lighter material, so you know, so it wouldn't cost too much to send it. I'll get around this in a sec. Be sure it's on, so it doesn't come off. Tying on it really doesn't matter. And you just pull the bolt through till it comes up. Now the other end, of course, you stick it through the hole at the bottom of this. It's nothing fancy, it's just a way of doing it.
It'll work though.
It's not really, you know, you don't need skinny hands in. And what I should be doing though is putting my glasses on, I can't see a damn thing. Through. Pull it through and just leave it like that. Do the other side exactly the same way. Lift up the motor and somehow we go bolt through. Now the bolt is too short, as I mentioned. If it was longer, you can then put your nut on just loosely and do the same for the other side. So basically you've actually got the alignment. Now this right, so you put a nut on and you're right. And you just pull the string if you can. But the nut will be on, it wouldn't fall down.
Yeah.
So you got it loose. So basically you've got the bolts through in the base. Now the next stage of what you want to do is actually get a center line of this wheel. Mark the pin's exact center. Alright, so you've got the center wheel. Then you need a little bit of a square. I think I've put it over here somewhere.
Oh, set square.
A little tiny square, yeah. But I've got the square, and before we go do anything, you put a center line smack in the middle, measure the width of this, half it, and put a line right through the middle of this board here. So all you simply do is from the point of that line to the point of that, so you've got the exact center position. Okay. Then center line set. Now don't worry about this at the moment, but try and get it as parallel the wheel to the board here, as close as you possibly can. If not, it really doesn't matter, because the guide, you can twist it at any angle for to be in line with this anyway. but it's best if you can align it properly. And at that stage, you've got the center line pretty well right. And then you have a look side on, and you can't go too far because the bolt determines that, you know, one position. So you think, okay, that looks reasonably good. That's square on that. Bolts are through, and then you just tighten up all the bolts.
Okay.
Right. But remember, as I said before, remove all the rubber feet from underneath, so it goes down solid, and you just bolt the machine down onto the base. This side doesn't matter because the positioning is determined by this plate here anyway.
Right.
Okay. So now this is fixed. Center line's put, and I suppose you can continue with this one. The next stage, what you want to do is you've got two guides on here, which really holds this little block in place. Now, as I said, this belongs to my mate, and he's painted, and he shouldn't have done so because it really makes it awkward for slipping. But anyway, he's got to remove it later on. So basically, you got it like that. At this point in time, you then have to maneuver this bottom base upwards. And there's two ways you can do that. You can go up as high as you possibly can, or up to the top, and just gently nip up. Right? Nip up the screws, just gently, not too tight, but so it stays there. Now, your guides is already on your machine. Now, at this stage of the game, you want to be sure that this block you've got, center line of the reed placing is in the center line of the wheel. Right?
Yep.
If not, you can loosen the screws of those guide strips and move both of them over or this way. You can move it either way to center, make sure that this block is centered on the wheel, and that's really the important thing. You can do it at this point in time. Loosen it, fair square, but you're still too high. You see, the wheel is hit, the base is hitting the wheel.
Right.
Now you can now go gently with a hammer, a soft hammer or sort of a rubber hammer or whichever hammer, and just gently tap this down. Now I'll get a hammer, let's see if I can show it to you. You can tap the front a bit and the back a bit. Now you find that the other one will whip up, but you've got to go just two directions until such time the wheel clears itself. Right, almost. Now it goes on there, but it's still touching because the wheel moved.
Well,
so you really haven't got it. At this stage, you just nip it up more, so you can actually, I might get a spanner and do that for you to show you. You can use just an open end spanner or a little shifter will do, and just tighten up all the bolts to a point where it just holds it firmly in place. I suppose you do two of them together, one here. Can't move. It's not too tight, because you still want to tap it yet. Right. So what if you, just to backtrack a bit, we've put the guides on, we squared the motor to the base, we then squared the block to the wheel, and then we adjust it by knocking down so it actually goes freely underneath. Now in your case the wheel would already have sandpaper on it, so the principle still applies, that it's got to be clear. And if you actually have a little bit too much later on, I wouldn't worry, but it's got to be totally clear. Now I think it's still touching a little bit, which I'm not happy with, so I'll just give it a little tap. And you look underneath, make sure there's no contact, and that looks pretty good. You can tell by the level of the gauge, you know, if you look between the two surfaces, you can see the gap, and the gap narrows as you push it through, and you can see it's okay, it's clear, but it's not. Turn the wheel, and it's not touching. All right.
Yep.
So that means you got the block set as close as you probably could. Now I already preset this angle on there, so you still may need to adjust. This blade here, it doesn't really matter whether this is higher or lower, but it's preferably to have it nice and horizontal, the base, okay? So now you've got the block going underneath clearly. And basically you've got it set up for your first try. Alright? We square this up on here as well, so we know that's running parallel. So we're all happy with that side of it. Then you go over to this side, and now use the square again. You drop it off to the center line of the shaft. You can sort of see, smack in the middle. Okay. You mark right on the edge a line, and if you want to measure it from there exactly to the middle, you can transfer a couple of other lines to be exact across, right? And if you did that, you then be able to draw a line across here. Then you got your block, and this is a steel block, but you've got a wooden block, right? Then you get the wood, this steel block. Now you got the V shape. Now you must get exactly in the middle of that V shape. With the pencil mark, draw a little line in the middle.
Right.
And basically, because you got a wooden block, which is solid all around, transfer the line across right to the bottom of that, straight.
Okay, yeah.
Nice and straight. So when you actually put it down, then you've got a line on the line.
You got a guide.
You got a guide. So you bring it up to the wheel close as you possibly can, and you say, okay, that line looks pretty good. And if you really want on the end of the block, you put a line too. But I think the front line is probably more important at this stage. And if this gate is not touching, or maybe too far away like that, then you've got to loosen the screws in there and bring it up to it. So all we're trying to achieve is that the middle of the reed is running center of the wheel actually.
Right.
And then once you think you're happy with that, you lock in the screws. Okay, and then you say, all right, this one is aligned with that. So you know the motor can't move, you know that's fairly square, and you know that's now aligned with the wheel. So you've virtually aligned it completely, right? And but also there's another thing you want to watch for, because the motor base may be a little bit twisted. You run the square across the face of this thing, and you look across that line to the bottom of the guide line. And you might find that this thing may be a bit over too far, but although it's on the line there, that means the whole thing would run across on an angle.
Right.
So what you'd have to try and do, keep the line on the line there, and bring this thing over in line with this. So you just look down and you say, okay, that looks pretty square on. That line looks the same as the aluminium guide. And you look at the here, and the center line is on center line. You know that's a perfectly square on this wheel. Okay? So that's set up. And then you just lock up all your screws, and that's set up. And basically, that's set up for the mid-center line. But there's another step to go. You may have a huge gap like that, and you say, right, that's no good. So then you get a bit of a tool to loosen up these screws. I think they're a bit solid now. Someone's starting them up actually. Just enough to be able to maneuver them.
So it's a little bit high at the top.
It's actually, the whole base plate's a bit low.
Right.
So if you put a bit of cane in there, it would take nothing off at all.
Oh yeah, I can see it, yeah. Sorry.
So you get a bit of a tool, and you work this thing up. Gradually. See it going up? Now, remember this is fixed, so you'll always remain the center line already.
Yes.
It's just a matter of up and down. And I suppose when you keep tapping until when you do that, you put a blade in. So actually when you go up, you'll probably hit it, and you know you've hit the spot. It means you still have to go a little bit more.
It's the end of the tape.
You're joking. Okay. Okay.
Still at recording, but
Right, it's coming to the end. Yeah. Alright, so you adjust your height to suit, and then you test the blade, and you got to achieve the measurements you need to get. And that's basically setting up.
yeah.
Call it quits. A point to remember is that you look at the bottom of this plate and that plate, if you put it on something flat, that also has to be flat in parallel. So always don't have it on an angle and going through like that. There's no point. Try and achieve the flatness to start with when you actually make adjustments to the height. And when you get the heights where you want them, you just lock up the bolts. And it's probably a little bit best if it's a bit too thin, you slightly loosen this up. Okay, just have a hammer and just tap it a bit. Smallest amount. And then take another blade until you get the thickness you want. And then check, make sure when the blade comes out that the curve is exactly in the middle. If the curve is too on one side, still too much, that means it could possibly be that the reed is over too far that way and it would sort of cut offset. You still have to try that out as a final check. So, and that means you may possibly have to move this whole contraption in the center of the line, and that's what you're trying to achieve, the center line. And so basically that's setting up. Oh, quickly before, and also once this is already set up, but you may have to adjust these screws for the angle if necessary. So maybe if you loosen them up, it'll come up, it'll be less angle. If you lower them a little bit and use that only for fine adjustments to give you a couple of thousandths of an inch. Okay, and that's basically it.
Right.